this 170, the story I've given you, the 170 cannon shells right up my kilt, which wasn't very funny. Right, now you just...
your logbook presumably starts with hearts and demons.
Not this one. I've got, you know, I eventually ended up with about 10,000 hours.
Did you?
But when I started, I was on Avro 504 in Egypt.
What period does this book go through then?
This starts in 38, when I was flying Wellesley's.
Ah, yes, yeah.
And that's when I came home from overseas, and I had I did about 2,200 hours on Wapitis, which was a very ancient airplane. Right, now let's get...
when did you first fly Sterling? When did you first Sterling fly?
I'm just coming to that. 42. Here we are, August the 6th.
1942.
42.
Where was that to?
Oakington.
That was a flight from Oakington, was it?
I was with the flight commander that I went there. I went there in the morning as a flight lieutenant, and in the afternoon I was a squadron leader, and the squadron leader gave me a trip round, familiarization. I didn't fly, but then 3 days later, or 2 days later, I went and I did the first Pathfinder operation to even put it down because we used to put a number in those days. And this was a fellow called Haywood. Now I'm writing up about him because he gave me a superb lesson in captaincy, and I had about, I should think, 7 or 8 more times more experience than him. But here I'm coming as an instructor after 2 years and 1 tour of operations, and I come down and a young flying officer gives me an excellent lesson in captaincy, and I've written that up.
And that was your first Pathfinder operation, flying Sterlings?
Yeah. It was the first Pathfinder operation. It was Flensburg.
Oh yes.
Flensburg, and a complete wrap-up due to weather. Then 2 nights later, Osnabrück, Maine, Düsseldorf.
Were you acting as Pathfinder on all these operations?
Well, it wasn't pathfinding per se. We were only dropping flares to light up the target. You see, pathfinding really didn't come into it until really, and I don't give a bugger what anybody says, it wasn't until the end of 42 until we got H2S, and then we could locate targets, except in the Ruhr.
Yes, yeah. They didn't have H2S on Sterlings though, did they?
Oh yeah.
Did they?
We were we were the first, we were amongst the first because it was very big and roomy.
Ah, the aircraft.
Yeah,
was able to accommodate
then Halifaxes came next.
But they were all external, weren't they, the H2S scanners?
Oh, that was just a scanner.
Oh, I see.
All the boxes and everything was inside. I know, and the scope that you saw, the picture of Earth, was in the navigation compartment. And the navigator and the set operators sat side by side, as if they were doing a duo on a piano. And what's our friend doing? He's not messing about with your camera, is he?
He wouldn't dare.
Yeah, I didn't think it. But you know, these young ones, they're very cheeky, these young ones.
I had noticed.
Yeah. Right, now.
Just have a look. There's a photograph I found in a book.
Yeah.
Of 7 Squadron. Now,
Yeah.
it's obviously
Yes, that's 7.
MGS, that's got to be... and we were just discussing, you and I, a few minutes ago, whether in fact that was taken at Oakington. And I wondered if that was at the time when the Stirling first became operational.
Yeah. Well, you see, it must have been very early because they've got the Bolton Paul turret. And one of the very earliest, because we had later on the Fraser Nash turret. That's a flat one, and when you look at that, that had a Bolton Paul turret, and Robert Taylor changed it for me,
I see.
for my,
to the Fraser Nash.
and he changed the G to a C.
Yeah, it's just a collection of
Yeah.
wartime photographs, but that one happened to have
No, I
a
can't tell.
particularly good picture of Stirling's.
I really can't
Oakington.
tell you. I'm sorry. I can't honestly tell you. That's very nice. That wasn't in my flight. S for sugar.
Was it based on the other aircraft that you've flown? Was it an easy aircraft to fly?
Very simple, very nice.
I've been told by several pilots that the Stirling was a nice aircraft to fly.
Very nice. But not for going to the enemy at 12,500 feet.
No.
No. You see, now, you may like to merge this into one of your questions. When Bennett comes along, here is a complete new type of person, the likes of which we have nobody else in the Royal Air Force or any other Air Force. A professional pilot with thousands and thousands of hours. Did all these non-stop flights from Dundee to nearly Cape Town, first across the Atlantic commercial, first to Egypt commercial, and all that sort. And he says, the first thing he says, this is bloody silly. We can't have one of his Pathfinders at 12,000 feet, and the Halifax at 18, and the Halifax at 18, and the Lancasters at 20. And some of the Lancasters, not with the Pathfinders, at 24. And the only way Lancasters had got to 24 was dropping their cookie in the North Sea, which is quite frequent, but not amongst the Pathfinders. Because when you took a picture on the target, you couldn't bugger about with the scale of your picture. And we eventually, all the squadrons, except 35, and Hanley Page sort of that, had Lancasters. And it was quite unrealistic that a commander in the field should have 4 squadrons, and each with a different. There were Wellingtons in 156 from one group, 5 group had Lancasters, 4 group had Halifaxes, and 3 group had Stirling. There was most times there should have been a changeover immediately.
So it was Bennett's idea to, in fact, concentrate all the Pathfinder force in Halifaxes and Lancasters.
No, Lancaster.
Lancaster
Or mosquitoes for oboe. And we also had the Light Night Striking Force, which were a Bakshi and an auxiliary Pathfinders. They did all the pathfindings and dropped bombs at phony targets. We were making from Nuremberg, they would make from, just say, wide apart, Hanover, and along come the oboe, or along come the mosquitoes, and drop target indicators, see, because they were quite accurate. They dropped target indicators and flares and bombs because they all carried cookies, but whilst your main Pathfinders are going on to another target and being relatively left alone, or the defences were split.
But not on the night that they went to Nuremberg.
Not on the night, but that's a story I deal with, and I'll have a lot of trouble with that. A lot of trouble with that, because I'll have to say things that probably...
Were you on that operation?
No. By that time I think I was commanding war boys, and I was concentrating on selection and training of pathfinders. Right.
Let me have my book back.
Yes, you have your book back in case you lose it. Now, if you want me to tell you about where I did get my squirt, you lead on at some stage. What about the story you've published about when you got the squirt?
When you collared C for colander.
Yeah, for
yeah.
colander.
Well, tell me about that then.
Yeah. Well, we're talking into this, aren't we,
Yes,
at the moment? Well, that was towards the end of my Pathfinder tour, and this was a period now where we're settling down. This is, I think, it was February 43. So our February 43, and to that end, I'm sorry, I don't know, I'm just trying to find February 43, and we are beginning to find our way about with H2S. And so we go to Cologne, and as you know, we have to weave. Now, I didn't believe in this vigorous corkscrew, which I used to argue with everybody about that sort of thing. Nevertheless, I used to bank, and so that my gunners could look underneath. I might have went over the vertical, I don't know, and then I would go on, but I'd never veer off more than 10 degrees at the most. None of this bloody business, you see, which upset the crew, and what's more important, upset me, because you know you're working like a fiddler's bitch. And so I only did that 10 degrees. But when the navigator says, "Skipper, we've got 5 minutes to run," and don't forget 5 minutes. 5 minutes is 15, 16, 17 miles, maybe ground speed or more, if the wind is behind you. You've got to really settle down to the run-up to the target, where the bomber then takes over. And although he doesn't personally fly the airplane, whatever instructions he gives you, it left, steady, right, or back a bit, and so you obey his instructions, and you're dead straight and level. And this is when the Ju-88, with his jazz music, you see, Schweidingen Musik, you see,
which we didn't know anything about.
We knew nothing about. And I'm talking of February
43.
43. I'd never heard of it, and I should have known as much about it as anybody else. But I bloody well didn't. And I got a squirt, 174 cannon shells. And some of the crew reckoned that there could be more. But that was where they claimed, you know, maybe the odd round went in the same hole, and they could have done. But I wasn't going to. 174 was enough.
But doesn't it say something for the Sterling that you brought it back?
I've got pictures of it, bloody riddle.
They all say it was
And
very well
crew
made.
wounded, and so was I. I could have had a Purple Heart. if I could have had it, taken a photograph of my bum and showed it to the Americans. But here we are. Here's we're Y markers. This is the worst sorter to date. Cloud finished immediately. We released our TIs, attacked simultaneously by flak and Ju-88. Because if you're straight enough for 1 minute, the predicted flak can get onto you, and it doesn't take. It only takes, if it takes a bomb, 11.3 minutes to reach the ground. It doesn't take the flak 11.3 seconds to get up there. And the 3 crew.
What was the date again, Hamish?
The 2nd of Feb, 43. And you'll see, you might see the wrong date on that little story.
Oh, yeah.
There's it, right?
Oh, that's very interesting. I'm going to say thank you very much indeed.
Right.
I've enjoyed it. I've got you on tape
Yeah,
forevermore.
and you've got your bits and pieces.
I'll
show you things you might want to take away with you, but that's up to
I just finished school.
you. Had.
Yeah. So I didn't mean it like that. I just finished school, and all the newspaper cuttings and clippings,
Yeah.
all the pieces of news as it was released, as the film was going on,
Yeah.
I collected them all.
And I've got a lot too, and
Yeah.
you can look through and take them away
Lovely.
with you. You
Yeah.
see?
This book, it's a bit tatty now because it's 20 years old.
Yeah.
That book is all the cuttings.
This means you're more than 20 years.
Yes, I'm afraid just a bit.
It doesn't look it, does it?
Just a bit. Well, plastic surgery is wonderful.
It is.
This is all the different bits
Right, okay.
as it comes
Yes,
Do you want to look in the book or something?
you haven't got Susan Hampshire in her knickers there.
Oh, so you're just testing them?
I'm going to have.
One of the things, no, it's over the page.
Oh, yeah.
One of the things that the Americans couldn't understand.
I just walked in.
Anyway. Oh, but that's another thing.
You refer to? Or
I'm sorry?
Have you got the small cards you need to refer to, or are you going to just speak?
Well, I generally speak ad hoc, and whatever comes into my head. I've done this thing nearly 100 times.
Yes, I'm sure you have, yes. Right.
So let's do a couple
try.
of dummy runs.
Let's try.
And there's no noise, you're quiet here. Right.
I'm not used to doing these things, so we'll just
Yeah,
try.
right.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, you're right.
And you're at this moment you're just taping,
Yes.
you're just sound.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and vision.
No, I'm videoing.
Right, okay. You go
Right.
straight ahead and let's get into it.
Right. 27th of January 1988. 20 years ago this summer, they were making the film Battle of Britain. Tell me how you first got involved in the making of the film.
Well, it's very simple. I had been involved in several movies. The first one was 633 Squadron, because they wanted someone associated with mosquitoes, and so I was the technical advisor on 633 Squadron. Then immediately after that, I got involved with Ben Fish, who was the co-producer with, and I'm trying to think of his name, Harry Saltzman. And so Harry Saltzman was able to, we had a meeting, and they said, how many Spitfires could you produce? And I said that to the best of my knowledge, only one that flies up the Mall every Battle of Britain day, and that's the only one. So they hired me, and at the end of the week, or maybe at the end of 10 days, certainly no more than 2 weeks, I had an idea that was over 100 Spitfires available, not all in flying condition. There was only one in flying condition. So that's how I started. That, from then on, but this was three and a half years stint for me. It took nearly 18 months, 2 years to get the aircraft.
So so overall then, you were actually working on the film for, what, 2 years before it actually started shooting?
At least 20 months. This was finding out where the aircraft were. In fact, the making of the film, one way or another, from the very start, and a hiccup, right in the middle of production, there was a hiccup when one backer pulled his money out, and there was over a year's gap, and I was the only person left on the payroll. Everybody went to the wall. And so somebody once said, the making of the film, The Battle of Britain, took as long as World War II. Which isn't strictly true, but it was very near.
Yeah, very close, yeah. When you actually got back on to collecting aeroplanes for the film?
Yeah. I actually, forgive me,
Yeah.
I never actually stopped. When production was halted, I still went on. I learned that the measurements and Heinkos that I didn't have in this country, I learned that I could get them in Spain. So that was a period where I headed off to Spain and got in touch with the RAF air attaché in Madrid, and that's where all the measurements and all the things came. So it was my function to go to Spain and negotiate with the Spanish Ministry of Defense, and indeed the Air Minister and Minister of Tourism, who looks after films in Spain. And so I went there and bought for the company 29 measurements, and then I was able to loan or borrow 31 Heinkos, and I got this from the Spanish government for free, except I had to paint and repaint them.
Yes. Yeah.
So that is the Luftwaffe all settled.
How easy was it to get the Spanish Air Force to loan you the airplanes? Because at that time...
That's something that's called low Scotch cunning, of which I have a fair measure.
Great, enough said.
I'm not putting you off, am I?
No. Getting back to the UK, how easy was it to persuade the Ministry of Defence to let you borrow Spitfires and move them around?
That was much more difficult, oddly enough, despite the fact that I spent 33 years in the Air Force. In this circumstance, you don't just deal with Air Force people in the Ministry of Defence. You're dealing with a great deal of very young civil servants who are in the lower echelons of the Treasury. And if it's not putting the thing too bluntly, they give my arse the eerie, because they want to charge you for everything. And my function is to my client is to see that you get as much as you can for nothing.
So, okay, you've got the German Luftwaffe in
Yes.
Spain, and you've got the Royal Air Force. Now, coming back on the Royal Air Force side, the ratio of Spitfires remaining to Hurricanes remaining was greatly higher, I believe.
Oh, yes.
There are a lot more Spitfires.
Please to remember that the ratio of Hurricanes to Spitfires in the battle, there's more Hurricanes than there was Spitfires. And Hurricanes shot down more aircraft because the Hurricanes were going for the bombers, and the Spitfires had to go to the escorting measurements. And that's something that people completely forget, because the Spitfire is the thing in the forefront of everybody's memory. But the Hurricanes shot down more, accounted for more. And that's just a simple fact of history.
So it was more difficult to acquire Hurricanes?
Yes. I believed there was only six Hurricanes in one piece in the world. There may be more, you never know. But I was able to locate 6, and I got every one of them. One even came from Canada, all the way from Canada. That one you saw on the clip. And so I had 6. But you see, with movie magic, you've got the 6 rolling up the whole time. And 6 becomes 12, and 12 becomes 24, and 24 becomes 48. And I can't go further than that because I don't know what goes on after that progression.
Yeah. Fascinating. So, okay, we've got all the aeroplanes.
We've got all the airplanes, we've got a Luftwaffe, and we've got the Royal Air Force.
When it came to actual location shooting in the UK
Yes.
and in Spain, were you present on the location shoot?
Invariably, my function is always ahead of shooting. And I had people that acted for me and did things, moving aircraft, for instance. Please to remember that I only had 12 Spitfires that flew. I had another 12 that were taxied, and another 12 that was what we call dressing. They just hang about in a hangar with in various aspects of undress, but that's just for backing and dressing, as the movie man says.
So, having seen the film several times,
Yes.
I notice on the list of technical advisors, it's headed by yourself.
Yeah.
A whole string of well-known Battle of Britain pilots.
Yes.
Like Bob Stanford Turk.
Bob Stanford Turk.
Ginger Lacey.
Ginger Lacey.
How big a part did they play in the authenticity
Well,
of the film?
it's simple, from my point of view, it's simple to explain to you, who were just a tiny tot at the time, that I am essentially a bomber baron. My whole life and my whole war was involved in the bomber offensive. First, in the useless years, the first 2 and useless half of the war, when we did nothing and only killed wonderful aircrew and lost aircraft. But when the Pathfinders came in, I was a founder Pathfinder. So I could hardly be, it was hardly logical that people could accept me as the chief technical advisor on the Battle of Britain film. Nevertheless, that's what I was hired for, that's what I was paid for. So I had to have someone, and I had to have several people. You mentioned Bob Stanford Tuck, who's no longer with us. I hired Stanford Tuck as my tactical advisor. He advised me about all the tactics and advised also the director and the art director, who makes little sketches, hundreds and hundreds of little sketches about a certain scene, and they go up on the wall and everybody knows what's going to happen. That follows that. Now also, it's common amongst movie people that they can let almost anything go through the unwinking eye of the camera. And this, I am utterly and wholly responsible. So I get a little guy, a very fierce little noddy fighter gentleman called Ginger Lacey, who, if the Germans had seen him with his great mop of red hair round and a very fierce Yorkshire gentleman to boot, he became the director's advisor, and he never left the side of the director, and he was right alongside the camera, and he would be aware by script of what was happening. And if somebody turned up to climb into a Spitfire wearing the kilt or dressed like Rob Roy, he put a stop to it. And this he did with great skill and very rough old Yorkshire justice.
Was there much of that going on? Did he have to...
A little. You see, movie people, and I'm not just talking about the stars, people like Laurence Olivier and Michael Caine and all the other performers, shall I call them, or artistes they would like to be called. There is no problem at all, but it's the little halfway bit actors, like the man that said, I cannot wear goggles and I mustn't wear a mask, because he said my public will never recognize me. And Ginger Lacey says, well, just a minute, I thought you actors acted through your eyes, and you literally acted. He said, yes, but they'll never see me. So Ginger Lacey said, that's all right. You see, there's 2 extras over there. They'll be very willing to change their job of extras, which they get, say, £30 a day for, and you're probably getting £300 a day. They'll swap with you. We then had no more trouble from the bit actors. And that was Ginger Lacey. That was what we call low Yorkshire cunning.
So,
would you like me to? There's a man called John Simpson who sadly died immediately after I think he didn't even see the premiere, but he died. And I contributed the work he did on the Battle to his end. He worked like a slave. He was an expert in Rolls-Royce engines, Maryland, an absolute expert. And unhappily, he was a man who couldn't somehow or other delegate. And if anything wanted doing, he was a guy that did it. Any special part of an engine, and we didn't have any spare engines. The engine was stripped, and the part was taken away to Bristol or further afield to Derby, Rolls-Royce Derby, and so on. And it was back on the airplane, on the engine the next morning. And he heard about all over the country to do that.
So did you have any great serviceability problems with the airplanes?
Oddly enough, no. I claimed that in a 12-week shooting schedule, I'd lose one airplane. I'd lose one airplane every week, and I'd end up with week 12 with no airplanes at all. Didn't work that way at all because of Simpson and the civilian maintenance. First line servicing was done by RAF airmen, that is filling up, pumping the tires up and doing all that sort of thing. Second line and maintenance was done by John Simpson's Aero Services at Denham. No, it wasn't Denham. I forgot, it doesn't matter. John Simpson's Aero Services. And they kept the aircraft going until week 12. Now, could we stop there because...
Okay.
Oh, yes. During the 1960s, most pilots were flying jets. So how did you get together 12, 13 pilots that could fly Spitfires?
Well, that was a very simple function for me. I asked the ministry for 12 pilots. And so, as I'm an ex-CFS instructor, I wanted people from CFS. And it didn't matter if they were jets. In fact, I said they would be jet instructors. But the magic of CFS is they fly aeroplanes. And not one of them needed more than half an hour circuit and bump, really. And they were flying, don't forget, they were flying Spitfires and they were flying Hurricanes. And this was very simple, and no RAF pilot worthy of the name and with a CFS category needed much encouragement to jump into a Spitfire and a Hurricane.
So they converted on using one of the two-seat Spitfires?
I had two Mark 9 Spitfires which are dual. And so only the wing commander. I had a wing commander, a squadron leader and 12 flight lieutenants. And I borrowed the Rolls-Royce Spitfire, and they said they wanted to nominate the pilot. And I gave them, I said, this is the best man, I think, for your Spitfire. And no one else flew that Spitfire. He also flew a rather special Hurricane, but that's something he could do quite easily. No problem there at all.
Flying the Spanish/German aeroplanes,
Yes.
leading the Messerschmitt pilots, I believe, was Comandante Pedro Santa Cruz. No?
Pedro Santa Cruz
Yes.
was not only Spanish pilot of some distinction, and before the war he was a well-known competitor in all the world aerobatic championships, and quite apart from being a Comandante in the Spanish Air Force, he also happened to be the test pilot for the local aircraft factory that made the Messerschmitt and made the Heinkel. So he was a dual, and all Spanish Air Force pilots, they only work half a day in any case. They change over into the civilian occupation after lunch, which is a very convenient way of, I tried to persuade the Minister of Defence to introduce that, which my chaps, my RAF pilots, thought that was a very good idea. But it never caught on.
Location work in Spain, I believe, involved some 30 plus Heinkel bombers.
Yes.
A similar number of Messerschmitt.
32 in fact.
Similar number of the Messerschmitt fighters.
29 Messerschmitts.
Were there any great problems getting the people to fly the big formations? Or
None at all. Remember that all the Luftwaffe were every one of them, was Spanish Air Force. And this was their daily task, flying Messerschmitts or Heinkels. And the formation flying was something they'd been doing up until the time that the Messerschmitts were withdrawn. You see, at this period, the Spanish Air Force withdrew their Messerschmitts and they had a jet fighter, and this was a part of the changeover. And there was no problem whatsoever. To experience, and the Spanish pilots were very experienced, and it might offend my Air Force colleagues that they were much, much more experienced than they were. And to that end, they were very much less trouble, and that will definitely offend the Air Force. The Air Force thought they were on a bit of a sort of holiday and didn't treat it in the same professional way as the Spaniards.
when the two Heinkels and 15 or 17 Messerschmitts came across to England to do the English film, were they still flown by Spanish pilots?
Oh yes.
So they came with
the Luftwaffe were Spaniards.
All the time.
And you may remember me telling you on another occasion that one of the reasons we had trouble-free, absolute trouble-free maintenance is that the Messerschmitts, in fact, and the Heinkels, they all had Rolls-Royce engines. And this is something that Adolf Galland, or Dolfo, as Hitler liked to call him, didn't take kindly to at all, because I found him a very tiresome gentleman, and he wanted to make the Battle of Britain film a sort of a form of let-out for his Luftwaffe, because he never got over the fact that they weren't beaten. And I think I should deal in a bit of history here. The RAF didn't win the Battle of Britain per se. It was a technical knockout. Right at the end, Adolf Gallant's fighter force was withdrawn. And this is historical, and this is something that the Noddies, the fighter boys, won't take very kindly to. One day they sat there exhausted, utterly and completely beaten, because they really were exhausted. If the Luftwaffe had come one more day, 2 more days at the most, the fighter command would have had it. But they didn't. They packed up and went off to Russia, or somewhere, I don't know. Doesn't matter. They weren't there. And this is a historical fact that perhaps had best be sort of veiled over in something. But I only deal in history, and I have nothing else to offer you.
Can we pause it there for a second?
Yeah.
During the making of the film, I believe 3 Percival Proctor aircraft were converted to resemble Stuka dive bombers. Did any of those actually fly in the film?
To the best of my belief, they may have been used in certain circumstances, but I don't recall anything going into what the movie people call the can and being used in the eventual final film. I bought 3 Proctors, and I used the whole 3 to mock up a sort of 1/3 scale Stuka. I was able to change the tail. I was able to de-gut the center section and make a complete new center section, which was offered up, which had the proper gull wing confrontation, and the same wings were put on. The canopy was changed, a rather long canopy, and the tail was changed. I couldn't get a 3-bladed prop, and that is probably the reason, in the main, why my phony Stuka was not used. But nevertheless, the shot you do see in the movie itself, where the Stuka is bombing the radar station on the Isle of Wight, or wherever it was a radio-controlled model, and very effective it was too. You actually see the bomb drop from the aircraft. A radio-controlled model, no argument.
Can you just hang on, Bruce, while I turn this? Sorry to stop you, but... Now, still keeping with converting aeroplanes to resemble the Battle of Britain variants, I understand there was only minor modifications needed to the Junkers 52 in Spain.
To the best of my belief, I only took the curtains, the chintz curtains off the windows, which the Spaniards seemed to favour. But I doubt very much if the Luftwaffe and General Milch, who was being impersonated in that scene, he wouldn't have liked to have been caught up amongst chintz curtains on his Ju-52.
The Messerschmitt 109s, did you not alter the wingtips?
Yes, and in order to give a clear definition between the baddies and the goodies, you have the elliptical, that exquisite elliptical wing shape plan of the Spitfire, and you have that cut-off, broken, vicious look of the Messerschmitt. But the Messerschmitt built by the Spaniards had nearly a metre of rounded wingtip put on. And when I approached Pedro Santa Cruz and told him we had to cut nearly a metre off his wing, he wasn't a bit happy, and he couldn't understand it because he didn't know at the time why an additional metre had been put on each wing. And it was claimed it was to give better stability near the ground for low-level strafing. And I said that if he took the wingtips off, and I inferred that I would test personally the de-winged Messerschmitt myself, which I was quite prepared to do. Now, this is tantamount to an insult to a Spaniard, especially a Spaniard of his ability, to do something that you're inferring he can't do. And so he got very annoyed and very Spanish and temperamental, and he said, "Certainly not, El Hamish," as he called me. "Certainly not, El Hamish. I will do the testing." And so we took the wingtips off, faired off the tips, and he did the testing, and he came down ecstatic. He said, "I can't understand why they put a metre on each wing. It's a better airplane by far without the wingtips," and we had no more trouble with Pedro Santa Cruz.
When it came to filming in the UK, was it a big problem to find suitable airfield locations?
None at all. The least of my problems. We had 10 airfields altogether, and you'll forgive me if I can't remember them all, but remember, the director wants a new vista from time to time, because he wants to give the impression there was a lot of airfields involved, you see. I don't know how many, but there must have been 20 or 30. Not just airfields per se, as we know, like Biggin Hill and so forth, but many airfields that were used were just a cricket pitch, really, with the boundary hedge cut down fore and aft so that an aircraft could take off and an aircraft could land. Made an awful mess of the rugger pitch, of course, but that's why in one of the scenes you see a cricket pavilion with the name of the cricket pitch whitewashed over, and this is part of the game. 10. Duxford, Biggin Hill, Northolt, Kenley, places like that. All well-known Battle of Britain and airfield on the coast, whose name I can't remember, but you can tell them all.
To get the aerial sequences for the film cameras, a B-25 Mitchell was highly modified, I believe. Did you have any contact or anything to do?
Well, this is one of my colleagues who's probably been involved in upwards of 80 or 90 films since. Jeff Hawke, very well-known movie fellow. He went to the States and had a B-25 modified, and also had the modification done that took 7 camera points all over the aircraft, and it was painted in psychedelic colours, as you probably saw in the last clip, when the camera or the aerial director could sit up right up in the Bone Dome or the Astrodome, and he could conduct the aircraft coming in like John Barbaroli in the Halley Orchestra, or somebody else conducting an orchestra. All done very simple.
After all the filming was completed, and the film was premiered and went out on general release, did the film live up to your expectations of it?
Well, please let me remind you that I wasn't a fighter person, but all the people in my fighter fraternity, all the noddies as we Bomber Command call them, they were very pleased with it. They had some reservations. Oddly enough, my American colleagues couldn't understand why we had a girl, as lovely as she was, traipsing about a bedroom in the Savoy Hotel in her knickers. You know, they felt that was, with the Spitfires and Hurricanes and Messerschmitts and Heinkels, they felt, why put, as they said, why put a broad in there? Which is their outlook, because they do this whenever there's an opportunity to put a woman in bed in their television or films. This is what they do, but they didn't think under the holy of holies of all movies about the Battle of Britain and Spitfires and Hurricanes to boot and Messerschmitts and Heinkels. Fancy having a broad in her knickers, but don't tell Susan Hampshire.
Okay, I think that's it.
That's it.
20 years after the making of the film. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
It's been a pleasure. Great.
Yeah,
Thanks.
right. Thank you very much, and thank you also.